Hi, and welcome to the sixth video in our PowerShell 7.2 for Beginners tutorial series. We're going to start looking at conditional statements now. So we're going to be looking in this video at the if, else if, and else. But before we go over that, we're actually going to take a few steps back to kind of the second video really, and just kind of re-explore some operators. Because the thing is, with conditional statements, we do need operators, because those conditional statements, like the if statement, actually looks for a boolean value, which we will get from our conditional statements using operators. So let's actually go ahead and let's look at some of the more basic operators in PowerShell first. So operators, often in most programming languages, you're going to probably be used to seeing, if you've used other programming languages, something like this to dictate 1 is greater than 2. Now this actually does not work in PowerShell, or also what you might also have seen to test for equality is 1 equals 2, which would equal to false, but this actually doesn't work in PowerShell as well. So the way to actually use operators in PowerShell and have conditional statements is actually using some dash operators. So what that actually means is going to be 1, then we're going to add a dash here, and then a whole list of operators comes up. So if we do EQ, it actually stands for equals to, and by default it is case insensitive. But let's actually just do some numbers first. So if we actually do 1 equals 2, we will actually get that it is false. But if we do 1 equals 1, of course, that will give us true. Now, what I'm also going to be doing is I'm going to be putting a comment beside each line just to tell what type of operator we're using on that line. So to make a comment in PowerShell, it is just the pound sign, the hashtag, or the number sign, depending on how you actually call this symbol. So here we're just going to do the equals. All right, so equals here. And then the other one, another popular one here would be 1 is LT for less than, and that's going to be less than 2. So if we actually run this here, we will actually get that it is actually true. That's going to be less than, and then we can also check if it is lesser or equal than. So if we do 2 dash LE 2, it's going to be less or equals 2. So if we run this line here, 2 is less than or equals to 2, it is true. If we do 1 is less than or equals to 2, it is also true. But if we change this to a 3, we will see that that actually comes back as false. Now, another thing that we can actually do is the greater thans. Now, very similar to the lesser thans, the only thing that really changes is the first letter. So we can actually do a 2 dash GE or GT for greater than. So 2 is greater than 1. We will get that as true. And if we do 2 is greater than 2, we will actually get that as false, because 2 is not greater than 2. It is equal to 2, but it is not greater than 2. So we can do this is greater than. And now if we do 2 dash GE2, we will see that this will actually give us true. Now if we do 2 is greater than or equals to 1, we will also get true. But of course, if we try to do 3, we will get that it is actually equal to false. So this one is greater or equals. I should actually correct these to lesser than or equal. Now we've seen lesser, greater, we've seen equals. There is actually a not equals as well. So we can actually do 1 dash NE, and we can say 2. And so 1 not equal to 2 will be true. The only time this one is false is if we did 1 not equals to 1. So this is not equals. Okay, perfect. So these are the very, very basic ones that you would use for numbers. You can often use this to check if an array, the amount of items in an array are greater than a certain number or lesser than a certain number. This is what you would actually use. Now there are some other ones in PowerShell that we can use. So let's say if we have just a simple array here and we have the words, let's do a number array first. And then we do a dash, and then we actually have a contain, so a containment operator. So if we do a dash contains 2, we will actually get the value of true back because it does contain 2. Now if we change this to 4, we will actually see that we get false because it actually does not contain 4. Now if we did a text-based array, like an array of strings, so we have the 2 words of test, and we do a dash contains again, and we do the word test in all capitals. I'll let you guys think about it for a couple seconds to see what it would equal out to. Now here we actually get that it equals true, because once again, this contains is actually not case sensitive. Now, if we actually wanted it to make it case sensitive, we could actually go ahead and there is another operator here. So if we do a dash C contains, so just a C and then contains, this actually dictates to be case sensitive. So if we run this now, we actually get false because the all caps test is not in the array. And if we just add it in here so we can just see how it looks like, if we add it in, we get true. So usually for most of these, if you do a C in front of it, you will actually see that it does become case sensitive. So let's use the equals as an example here. So if we do the word again test, and we do that it equals test, all caps, we will actually get true now. And then if we actually went ahead and we did the same thing, and all we did was add a C in front of the dash EQ, we actually get false, so it is case sensitive. And you will notice that if we actually just start typing out some options here, so if we do a dash, and when we get some options here, you will actually see a pretty good description on the side of what it is. So here we have the equals to, which is case sensitive because it is the CEQ. C contains, it is case sensitive. So in Visual Studio Code, it'll tell you which ones are case sensitive, which ones are not. And there are a bunch of different operators here. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them in a video, but they are all pretty easy to find in the Microsoft documentation. I'm just going over really the more common ones, especially in this beginner tutorial, that you will probably use in some scripts early on. In some of my other projects that you will find on this channel, I do use some other operators at times as well. All right, so what we can actually do with PowerShell that is not actually an operator, but we can actually use some commandlets as well as conditional statements. So an example for this is I actually have a folder inside of my scripts folder here called data, and I have this text file with some text in it. So what we can actually do, we can actually test to see if a file exists. So if we actually just do a variable here, we're going to call it file path. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put in the file path here. So for me, it's actually going to be C scripts, my if else, and then we're going to put data, and then we're going to put text.test.txt. And then what we can actually do is do a test path commandlet, and we have a path parameter, and we can actually pass in the file path here. So if we actually run this here, we will see that we actually get true because that file does exist. But if I actually put 1 here after the test, we will actually get false because test1 does not exist in this folder. So this is very, very handy, and we're actually going to start the main guts of the video now and looking at these if, else statements. And we're actually going to be using the test path, and then we're going to be using some of these numerical operators as well. So let's go ahead and let's write our if statement here. So let's do an if, then we're going to do an open and close parentheses. And then what we're going to put in here is we're going to put in our test dash path, and then our path parameter, and then file path. And then we're going to do an open and close curly bracket. And then all we're going to do in here is we're going to do write output, and all we're going to do is file exit. Just put space in there so it looks a little bit nice. So here we are saying if test of the file path is equal to true, because this will only execute if it is equals out to true. Now you could actually say when it actually equals to false. So if we actually wrap this here and we do a -eq false, it will actually test for a false, or you could use an else statement as well. But let's just stick with the basics for now. And let's just see if the path is actually true, we're going to print out the file exists. So we're actually going to leave the path as the wrong path for now, just to see. And as we can see, we get false here because of this line. So let's just remove this here. And if we run this, we currently get no output. Now, if we fix the path to the path that actually exists, and we run this, we get file exists. So it actually evaluated this statement to true, and it tells us that the file exists. Now what we can actually do as well is do a get content here on the path of file path, and we can just erase this write output here for now. So what this commandlet does is it gets the content of a file. So if we actually run this here, we will actually see this is a test text file, line 2 of the test file, and line 3 of the test file. So we have 3 lines, and we are getting the content. Now, let's see what would actually happen if we had the wrong path here, and we just tried to get content on that wrong path. Now, as you can see, we actually get an error because it tells us that our file does not exist. So this is where if statements come in handy. So here what we can actually say is if the test path, file path, if it exists, then let's get the content, and then we can actually say else, open and close curly brackets. And in here, what we can do is we could do a write output, and we're going to write out the string of file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a $ file path does not exist. Now, one thing to keep note, I'm going to go over this probably a few times in this series, but I used the double quotes here so I can actually do a variable reference inside. If I had used a pair of single quotes, we're going to see that it is not highlighted, and if I actually run this right now as is, what we get back is file, $ file path does not exist. But if we actually change this to double quotes here, we will actually get file, and then we actually get our file path does not exist. Now, what I like to do around file paths is I actually like to add double quotes to the file path. Now, how you would actually do that is by using an escape character, because if we try to just put some double quotes in here, we will actually see that this does not give us the result that we expect. It still kind of gives us something similar. It file, and then we start a new line, and it tells us our file path does not exist. It kind of does what we would expect it to do, but a little bit weird. Now, another way that we could do is we could do some single quotes here. And this will actually work as well. So it will wrap it in single quotes. But let's say we were really uh, persistent on wanting double quotes here. What you can actually do is the backtick and then double quote. And then after the file path, do a backtick and then a double quote. What the backtick is an escape character. It'll let you put quotes, and it will just be interpreted as a character and not as an actual double quote to signify beginning or end of a string. So if we actually run this here, we will see file, double quote, and then our file path, double quote does not exist. All right, so let's actually correct the path here, and we can run this, and we actually get the content of our file path. Now, what we're actually going to want to do so we can actually use this data is we're going to store it in a variable. We're going to call it data. And let's run this once again. So now as we can see, we actually don't get anything back. But let's actually see what we have in data here. So if we do data, we do a dot in it. So we have a count. So as you can see, we have quite a bit of info. We can also just highlight it and execute data. We get what was in our file. And if we do a dot count, we will actually get the number of lines in our file. So we have 3 lines. So let's do a nested if statement. So here we're going to be doing an if statement inside of another if statement. And this one, we're actually going to use the else if as well. So let's do an if here, and let's do if data dot count is less than 2, then curly brackets, and we're going to do a write output. This file has less than 2 lines. And then let's do an else if. Now the else if is actually all one word. It is not 2 words, but we will actually need another pair of parentheses here. And we're going to do data dot count is less than 3. And here we're going to do a write output. This file has less than 3 lines, but at least 2. So actually, based on this here, so let's do less than 4 actually. So this file has less than 4 lines, but at least 2. So it could be 2 or 3 here. And then we will have an else. And then we're going to have a write output here. And we're going to say this file has 4 or more lines. All right, so let's explore what we just wrote here. So here we're saying if the number of lines in our file is less than 2, so if it's 1 or 0, we're going to say this file has less than 2 lines of code. And then we can say else if the amount of lines is less than 4, this file has less than 4 lines, but at least 2. And why I'm saying this is in an else statement, only one statement ever gets ran. So it goes in order, so it'll check if the data count is less than 2, it'll execute this, and it automatically exits out of that if statement, and it continues on with the code. Now, if it was 3, it'll check it. It'll say, nope, it's not less than 2, but it is less than 4. So we're going to output this, and then we exit out of the if statement altogether. If not, we're going to go to the 4, and then we're going to exit out here. And we're just actually going to put a write output at the end here. This is after the if statement. All right, so if we actually run this here, we know that we have 3 lines of code, 3 lines in our test file. So in theory, we should be executing this line here. So let's see what happens. All right, so here it is. We actually get this file has less than 4 lines, but at least 2. So let's actually see here if we could, let's add one more line here. So line 4 of the test file. And let's go back into our code here. And let's run the entire thing here. Here we have this file has 4 or more lines. This is after the if statement. And then if we actually just reduce it to 1 line here, and we run this again, this file has less than 2 lines. Now, if we put the lines back here and we only have 2 lines, we see that this file has less than 4 lines, but at least 2. So what we can actually do as well to change this is, let's say this changes to less than or equals to 2. So this file actually has 2 or less lines, and then this one would be the file has 3 lines. Now, the reason why I can say that this file has 3 lines, of course, we're only checking if it has less than 4, but in this case, we know that it is less than or equals to 2 here. So 1 and 2, 0, 1, and 2 will be covered by this case. 3 will be covered by this case. And then 4 or more would be covered by this case. So if we actually go ahead and we run it again here, we actually see this file has 2 or less lines. If we added once again the third line here, we would see that we have this file has 3 lines. And if we came ahead and added the 4th line once again, we see that this file has 4 or more lines. So we could easily change this to equals 3, and this would be the exact same output. So there are a lot of different ways to write if statements. What you really have to pay attention to is the priority of your statements. You always want to, if you want a certain case to be more important than another one, you're always going to want to put it closer to the top. And then the else statement will just kind of capture anything else. And that is really the basics for an if, else statement. I hope that kind of clarifies things up a little bit. In the next video, we're going to be covering switch statements, which are a replacement for extremely long if statements. Mostly due to one variable if statements can be replaced by switch statements. So we're going to be taking a look at that in the next video. In the meantime, I would definitely recommend getting some practice in with these if, else statements. They are very, very useful in actual scripting environments and actual programming environments. They're highly used, as well as the loops that we will see in a little bit, but conditional statements are very, very important to comprehend and understand how they work. If you guys have any comments or questions, please let me know down below in the comment section. If it's something that's quite generic, I might just make a video. This way everyone can benefit. If it's something a little bit more specific, I'll just answer you directly in the comment section. If you guys have any other ideas that you guys would like to see on the channel, please let me know as well. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and also don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out, and I will see you guys on the next video.